Welcome to an emergency edition of the Fantasy Football Fellows podcast. It's Lucas, Cameron, and Tyler here. Normally, we post podcasts later in the week, Thursday, Friday, somewhere in that range. But we can't wait that long to talk about what went down just yesterday. Julio Jones getting traded to the Tennessee Titans for a mere second-round pick. So we're going to discuss that here. Little roundtable discussion. Talk about what we see for Julio's stock, what we see for AJ Brown, Titans offense, Falcons offense, and the like. So we'll keep this one short, but we couldn't let this one sit and marinate until Thursday because it's old news at that point, and we're not about old news. So, fellas, how we doing today?
Not at all. We're doing great, fantastic, astounding.
Yeah, fantastic, astounding. You know, little sunburn on the face because we sat through a outdoor graduation the other day. But you know what? There's fantasy football to talk about now. Nothing else matters.
Nothing a little sunburn can't stop, right? We got to talk fantasy here. Cool.
Never.
Let's just get into it right away to keep this one short. Cameron, let's start with you. What were first thoughts when you heard the Julio news go down that he was traded from the Falcons to the Titans?
I don't know. I thought I was kind of excited. I think it just changes so much in the fantasy landscape for those two teams. I had Calvin Ridley shoot up my draft board. I was already pretty high on him. I don't think my rankings necessarily reflected how high I was on Calvin Ridley because I think he can fall. Like now I have him at 10, and I think he can like stay in that range, or he can shoot up to 1, because he has that potential when Julio's not there. Same with Pitts, and then but yeah, I was just kind of excited overall.
Yeah, Tyler, what about you? What were your first thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think just from a roster management standpoint, it's a great move for Tennessee because now you just add an absolute elite weapon that will complement AJ Brown. But that offense is now, dare I say, the scariest offense in the NFL because you've got Derrick Henry who will just stiff arm you, truck you, do whatever to not get tackled. Then you hit the play action, you can hit AJ Brown or Julio, who are probably two of the best, receivers in open space in the NFL. So, like I said, a great roster management move for Tennessee in terms of a fantasy impact. I think the one player that actually, their stock increases in my mind is actually Mike Davis. Yeah, Calvin Ridley is going to move up the board just because he's not going to have to fight for targets anymore. Kyle Pitts kind of stays the same. I don't know how you can move a rookie tight end up any higher than I think some of us already have him.
Right.
But like I said, Mike Davis is now going to be that much more utilized now, whether that's carries or passes out of the backfield. So, my love for Mike Davis was already high, and I think it went even higher after Julio left. So,
yeah, Mike Davis, really good receiving back. Took over from McCaffrey last year, filled that role very nicely. A few more targets open up for him, hopefully. My first thoughts, this isn't fantasy relevant, but they traded him for a second-round pick.
And a fourth.
Yep.
And a fourth. Thank you. The second was the headliner though.
Yes.
Ooh, big headliner. And when you look at, some of the numbers, I just saw these today. Julio's been second in targets since 2011. These numbers are second in targets, second in receptions, first in receiving yards, first in yards after catch, first in 100-yard games, and tied for first in 1,000-yard seasons. That's worth a second-round pick. And we can talk about the logistics of all that and the politics that go into why he was only a second-round pick. But regardless, I think that just baffles me at the end of the day. It's just a travesty in my mind. But The Titans did what they had to do. They got their number 2 guy, like you both have said, and that offense just becomes all of a sudden more dynamic. So let's talk Julio specifically. Cameron, you mentioned Calvin Ridley going up your board. Tyler, you mentioned Mike Davis going up your board a little bit. What about Julio? Where was Julio at in your rankings, and where's he at now? Tyler, why don't you kick us off with that?
Sure. So before the trade, I had him at wide receiver 18, which I thought was pretty fair just because he can produce, but he's just got to stay healthy. And it seems like with Julio, he's on this every other year kind of pattern where he's top 5 one year. Next year, he'll get hurt, and then he plays maybe half the season. So, and now with what? He's 32, 31?
Wrong side of 30. I know that much.
Yeah. So it was hard to justify a top 15 for me. After this trade, I initially moved him up to 13, and I think I'm still going to have to think on it for a couple days because does a switch to Tennessee really make him that high of a receiver? I mean, he's going from a offense that was very pass heavy and was fighting for targets with Calvin Ridley, and now he's going to a run first offense and will fight for targets with another wide receiver. So like I said, I initially put him at 13 right now. But I wouldn't even be surprised if I go back in tomorrow and I'm like, you know what? Maybe it's more like a 15 or 16. So yeah, that's where I've got him right now. We'll see, what happens tomorrow. But even, I mean, heck, these rankings will change constantly up until week 1 of the NFL. So
Yeah, I don't think that's unreasonable. Cameron, where do you have him at?
I had him at 18. I kept him at 18. I think it's the same as Tyler. I think AJ Brown and Calvin Ridley are so good. Even my rankings, the only change I really made was I flipped Calvin Ridley and AJ Brown. I had AJ at 9 and Calvin at 11, and now I got Calvin at 9, AJ at 11. I just think they're going to get the same amount of quality. Like Julio's going to get the same amount of quality targets as he would in Atlanta. Just because instead, like you were saying, like he's fighting for those receptions with AJ Brown, and but before he was fighting with them with Calvin Ridley and Kyle Pitts in an offense that threw more. So I think he's going to get the same amount of targets. Derrick Henry's definitely going to help spread that or open up the field for him because defense is still got to have 6 guys in the box every time Derrick Henry's on the field because you can't stop him with four guys in the box. And so he's going to get, I think he'll probably actually get more one-on-one this year than he has. And I also think the thing about Julio is I feel like he's going to come in super motivated. Like he's just going to come in like, I need to prove it right now. Like this is my last chance to prove it. Otherwise teams are never going to take a chance on me again. And if he can come do that, then they're going to be like, oh, well, Father Time didn't catch up to Julio. It was just a blip of the season last year. So I don't know. I think that'd be really interesting to watch.
Yeah, don't disagree with anything that's already been said. Don't think I really need to add anything. I moved Julio up from wide receiver 18 to wide receiver 15. I think part of it is just in a more, I'll say a dynamic offense with the dual threat of Derrick Henry and having guys in the box. I don't think that's the same threats in Atlanta. All of a sudden, Kyle Pitts isn't there to compete with targets anymore either. So I bumped him up a couple spots, but I think like Tyler, I'm going to sit on that for a couple days. And Julio's probably going to be all over my board, probably as low as 20, but could be as high as like 10 at some point too. But regardless, I have him at 15 right now, and I think that's where I'm comfortable with him at. So Cameron, you've talked about the other pass catcher in that Titans offense and AJ Brown. You had him drop a little bit because of Julio's targets. Tyler, what about you? What do you, where do you have AJ Brown at now? How does the addition of Julio affect his fantasy impact or outlook for you?
yeah, so AJ Brown before the trade was my wide receiver 10. Cameron actually graciously traded me AJ Brown last year and he paid the price for it. So
Zach Ertz was a great get. Okay.
I was gonna say I just want
and Chris Godwin and Deshaun Watson. All right, it wasn't Zach Ertz for AJ Brown straight up. I don't want that being the thought either. So
sorry. I just had to mention that Cameron just such a nice fantasy player that he just offered me AJ Brown. So
championship.
Oh
sorry, just had to bring that up.
Just had to say it.
AJ Brown.
Yeah, AJ Brown. So like I said, he was my wide receiver 10. And he's in the same boat as Julio, where I still cannot find a good spot for him. I have him at 14 right now, and I really think that's kind of low. See, because whenever I'm ranking, my thought goes to, okay, who's 1 and who's 2, right? And I think with Atlanta, that was one of the best duos where you're like, okay, this is the one time where a 1A and 1B receiver are actually both going to be productive. So I can justify a higher ranking for both of them. But something tells me that this isn't this, or this is the same case, but these are two very different. It's two very different situations, I should say. So is Julio really wide receiver 2? Is he 1B? Is he still 1A? So once you see a little bit more, in the coming days, coming weeks, I think then we'll start to kind of solidify a spot. But I would not be surprised if my rankings go like AJ Brown then Julio or vice versa. So
Yeah, I think AJ Brown, I mean, he can still be wide receiver 1 this year, or at least top 3. I think Ridley's the same. Obviously, if Julio can figure out how to play like he had before, I mean, he can obviously be wide receiver 1, just because we know he can put up monster games. Now, it's a big if he can get back to where he was 2 years ago. But I don't know. I just think they all have that potential still to break out. I don't think that goes away with Julio moving over to Tennessee.
Agreed.
Yeah, it seems like a very similar situation, other than they now have Derrick Henry in the backfield. And I'll make this a yes or no question. Does the addition of Julio change your outlook on Derrick Henry and your running back position for him this season?
No.
Excellent. That was my opinion as well.
The only thing on Derrick Henry is the pace at which he's kept at, the amount of touches he's been getting. There's only one player in NFL history who's had as much touches as comparably as much touches as he did last year, and then kept it up for the next year, and that was Adrian Peterson. So, I mean, looking at Derrick Henry, his size, the way he runs the ball, I don't doubt that he can do it. It's just, history's not on his side. Right. But if anybody's going to do it, it's Derrick Henry. So,
right. I think we're likely to see, a regression from Derrick Henry this year, just on the front of, he had so many touches last year, and I just don't think he's going to see that again this year. Now with the addition of Julio, but at the same time, get those top 5 running backs, and I really don't think it's enough to make me knock him 2, 3, 4 spots. Right? Like, it's all those guys at the top have their flaws, and I think it comes down to a matter of preference. So. I'm with y'all. No matter
what, I don't think he leaves the top 6.
No, not goodness, no.
I think he's still top 3 running back. Maybe you switch Kamara in for Henry if Jameis starts, but I there's no way he drops below 4.
Yeah, I don't trust Saquon enough in his health yet, and Zeke is just too volume dependent for me. Not volume dependent, but there's so many weapons, so many mouths to feed in that offense that it's almost a disadvantage for Zeke. So anyways, cool. That in terms of my thoughts on AJ Brown, I bumped him down. I had him at wide receiver 6, I believe, and I bumped him down to wide receiver 8. Again, nothing else that hasn't been said already. I don't know who's going to be 1A and who's going to be 1B. All I know is that I think there's still going to be top 20 wide receivers. Where I have him in that top 20 is going to fluctuate, but I feel comfortable with keeping AJ Brown inside my top 10 at this moment in time after the trade. So, last Titans player before we can move on to how it impacts the Falcons players then, just because that's where Julio came from. Ryan Tannehill. Cameron, how does this change your outlook on Ryan Tannehill going into the season?
I moved Tannehill up to wide receiver quarterback, number 11. Okay. He's in an offense now where play action in that offense is going to be deadly no matter what. When you have Derrick Henry, that's just how it's going to be, because teams have to respect that run. If you start backing out, Henry's going to get 6 yards a carry. So they need to respect that. Also, he has 2 wide receivers now where he can literally just throw the ball up in the air and one of them is going to get it. That's what Julio did for Matt Ryan for 10 years now.
Right.
And his size is not going to go away with age. He's still the same height. He's going to still be the same weight. He's going to be able to get those balls. And AJ Brown's a special talent. So when you can have 2 wide receivers like that, it's hard not to succeed. And Tannehill's got a sneaky little amount of running that he can do too. We saw that in that Green Bay game last year on that 40-yard run. So he can put up some numbers with his legs. I mean, it's not going to be like 10 points a game. It might be like 1 or 2 points a game, but in the grand scheme of things, that does help when you're thinking about quarterback rankings, because all those top 12 quarterbacks are within 4 points of each other. So I moved him up to 11. I can see him probably staying in that probably 14 to like 7 range. I think is where he's going to end up falling within. I'm leaning towards the higher part of that just because of how that offense is, seeing that they're really trying to work Henry into more catches this year. So getting him involved in more ways, I just think that's going to help out Tannehill a lot fantasy-wise.
Tyler, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have him at 11 as well.
Cop here.
And sorry. I have to actually get back on Cam for taking all the players that I should have taken in the mock draft. So this is my only way to get him back. So anyway, I go back to the first episode that we talked about in Cam's headline of like the top 9 or 10 quarterbacks, how you really don't have to like reach for a quarterback. If one of them falls into your lap, perfect, right? I think you can add Tannehill to that conversation now, where if he falls into that second tier quarterback, I guess, that's amazing value. Just knowing that, like Cam said, he could run the ball and he's got 2 targets now. And plus, you shouldn't really sleep on Anthony Ferkser, the tight end in Tennessee, because Tennessee has loved utilizing their tight ends as receivers. So I think there's plenty of opportunity for Tannehill to go even above 11, like Cam said, to go as high as like 7 or 6. So if he falls into your lap in a fantasy draft and you need a quarterback, take him.
Yeah, if Tannehill's your backup quarterback, that's just awesome. Then you don't have to worry about quarterback at all for the rest of the year.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You're set.
Yeah, I think Tannehill's one of those guys, at least at this moment. I think we'll have a lot of hype generated around him, but closer to draft days in late July, early middle August, I think Tannehill won't catch as much buzz anymore. And I think it's just because his name is Ryan Tannehill, and all we can think of Ryan Tannehill is the Dolphins years. At least that's still me, but I have Tannehill. Unlike you two, I have Ryan Tannehill at QB 12. Still have Jalen Hurts at QB 11, but we're not talking about Jalen Hurts right now. Biggest head shake, eye rolls. They don't agree with me. I'm all in on Jalen Hurts. But Ryan Tannehill, I have him at QB 12. Had him behind guys like Stafford and Joe Burrow and Matt Ryan. Moved him, up a few spots now ahead of those guys. Not quite in that top 10 range, but knocking on the door, I think, like you both have said, could be a top 10 guy towards the end of this season, we could see. So I think that covers the Titans. Let's talk Falcons here now. Let's move on to maybe the person who's most impacted by the departure of Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley. Tyler, let's start with you. What changes about Calvin Ridley's stock for you now?
I think so. Ridley moves up 1 spot for me. But he's probably got one of the highest ceilings in all of fantasy. Clearly there's a good connection between Matt Ryan and Calvin Ridley, where Matt Ryan clearly trusts him. I guess the one thing to kind of look out for now is, are teams going to double team Calvin Ridley a lot, or are they going to put a safety over the top? I mean, that does kind of leave the field open to Kyle Pitts. And I think teams would be willing to sacrifice a rookie season for Kyle Pitts just to see what he's made of in order to double team Calvin Ridley. So, but if teams still are going man to man on Calvin Ridley, Ridley's one of the best route runners, one of the best, all around wide receivers in the game. So he's still worthy of a wide receiver 1 pick in my mind. But we'll see what happens if defenses double team him. And I think in that scenario, maybe try to move him. I mean, while there's still value to his name, but you've got to really watch the games in depth to be like in the know of like, oh yeah, definitely going to maybe look to get some value back for Ridley. But like I said, he's still a wide receiver one in my mind.
Yeah.
If Ridley managed to fall to me in round 3, I would be ecstatic. He's just that good.
Yep.
Those first 3 games last year that he had, he was 30 points a game. It was
He
unreal.
was wide receiver 2.
Yeah, he was
wide receiver 1, actually.
Yeah, he was the best receiver in football those first 3 games. And all of last year, he had the highest completion set percentage of any wide receiver in the 10 to 20 yard range. Like, if you're catching passes in the 10 to 20 yard range, that's going to put up fantasy points, especially if and I think he was also the most completions in the 10 to 20 yard range last year. So if you're doing that over and over again, that's going to put up a lot of fantasy points, and that's going to help you score a lot more touchdowns. And he's been a touchdown monster his whole career. He was the reason Julio wasn't catching a ton of touchdowns these last 2 seasons, because every time they're in the red zone, Ridley went out and caught it. He just gets great separation, is always open, and he catches everything. So I don't think there's much more you can ask for in wide receiver 1.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think Ridley has more than proven himself. Yeah, I think like you said, Tyler, it'd be interesting to see how teams now all of a sudden handle Calvin Ridley and at what expense they want to see Kyle Pitts go to work too. But again, as a first-year tight end in the league, history shows they're not necessarily all that they're made out to be. But I don't know, it's Kyle Pitts, and we're treating him like he could be the next, Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Darren Waller. So I won't confine him there. But anyways, I bumped Calvin Ridley into my top 10 wide receivers. I had him, I believe, right around the 13, 14, 15 range. I've got him a wide receiver 7 now. Don't necessarily take PFF Fantasy Football as gospel, but they updated Calvin Ridley's projections to 100 catches this year, over 15,000 yards, 9 touchdowns, and being the number 2 overall wide receiver in fantasy. So again, I'm not saying you should take that as gospel. I'm not saying you should draft Ridley as wide receiver 2. Like I said, I have him at 7. And I feel good about having him at 7. So I again, nothing that hasn't been said already. I think Ridley will be a fine wide receiver 1 this year. If you can snag him around the Justin Jefferson, Michael Thomas, Terry McLaurin, Keenan Allen range, I think you got yourself a home run. So Ridley's a guy who I think people should definitely be paying attention to closer to draft time. So last guy in that Falcons offense, I think that's really worth talking about. I think Tyler did all the Mike Davis justice I would need to do on this podcast for right now, at least. But Kyle Pitts, we've talked about him already a little bit. I mean, all of us had him pretty insanely high on our boards already, which we weren't sure how we all felt about. But Cameron, where did you have Kyle Pitts? Where do you have him now? Do you think his outlook changes much?
I didn't move him. I got him right behind TJ Hawkinson, Mark Andrews.
Tight end 6.
Yeah, I think he's going to be – I would be willing to take a flyer on him there just because I don't trust any of the other tight ends behind him, really. I think, like, Dallas Goedert, Mike Gesicki, maybe Noah Fant, Logan Thomas, Robert Tonyan, if Rodgers stays, can all put up decent numbers. But it's not like, oh, if I miss out on one of them, I'm going to be heartbroken,
Yeah.
So
yep.
But at the same time, if Kyle Pitts is everything that they've dreamed him up to be, if he's worthy of that 4th overall pick in this first year, not saying that if he's not that good this year that he's not worth that 4th overall pick, but if he starts this year, he could be in that conversation of Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Darren Waller. Like his ceiling is ridiculous right now, just because we don't really know what to expect from a Kyle Pitts. So if he falls to me, I'm not going to reach for Kyle Pitts just because at the same time, if I take him over my wide receiver 3 on my team and he doesn't pan out, that'd really suck, So I think he kind of falls to me. I don't even know what round I'd take him in, but if he fell back to me, I wouldn't have a problem taking him.
What about you, Tyler?
Yeah, same as Cam. I didn't move him on my board. I have him at tight end 8. Um, just that I've got to see a season. I mean, if there's one rookie that um I don't necessarily need to see a season of, it's Jamar Chase, but that's mainly just because of Joe Burrow. So um yeah, I think with Pitts, I don't think I see I'm so confused with their new head coach, Arthur Smith, because he was the OC in Tennessee with Derrick Henry, who just ran the ball. So unless Arthur Smith is like an offensive genius and can get, guys into space, you could see Pitts become, a Darren Waller almost, right? Where he can demand a high, target ratio or target to catch ratio and all that. So, yeah, it doesn't really move. Not going to reach for him. But I would say if you take him and you find another tight end later, like Hunter Henry of the world, I think you would be pretty well set at tight end.
Yeah, if I'm taking Kyle Pitts as my tight end 1, I want another guy in the top 10 in case he doesn't pan out. I had Kyle Pitts at tight end 8 behind Logan Thomas and Noah Fant, bumped him up ahead of those two. Now that there's more targets, it didn't feel right to keep him behind those two, because the only reason why I still had him behind those two was just that I had my reservations on him still. We don't know. He's a first-year tight end. And I'll keep preaching this. I was big on TJ Hawkinson his first year in the league. I thought he went to the perfect offense in Detroit, where Galladay was the clear one, and Marvin Jones was like wide receiver 2.5 because he just couldn't figure out how to be the most consistent wide receiver 2 in the world. But Hawkinson took a year to develop, and I've learned my lesson since. There's just so many targets vacated now for Kyle Pitts to take. We could talk about Russell Gage is going to take some of those. I think Russell Gage shoots up a board, but I don't think he's worth talking about. He's a late round flyer guy if you're going to take someone, I think. I'm taking both Ridley and Pitts before I take a strong look at Russell Gage. But Tyler, I saw your eyebrows kind of raise, so I'll maybe let you lead off closing remarks with what you have to say about Russell Gage. But
yeah, I've got a little note for Russell Gage. I don't know if you guys saw this earlier, but after the bye last year for the Falcons, granted there was a coaching change and all that stuff, but stats are saying that Gage was on pace for 140 targets, 90 receptions, 1,000 yards, and 8 touchdowns after the bye.
Oh, wow.
So
when was the bye?
I think it was like week 6 or something.
I think it was first half of the season.
Yeah, it was an earlier bye for the Falcons last year. So that's something to keep an eye out on. Certainly you're not going to start Russell Gage on your team week to week. But if you can, if he's your, I don't know, fourth receiver on your team.
Yep.
And he does kind of keep that production going like you did last year with Matt Ryan. You've got a pretty good wide receiver core for your fantasy team. So that was pretty interesting because it's like, okay, literally like you go Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, then who? Then you're like, oh, right. Yeah, right. Russell Gage. But after you hear those stats, you're like, oh, maybe I should take a closer look at Russell Gage. So I would say just keep your eyes on him. Take a late flyer on him if he's still there. And just kind of hope and pray that connection between Matt Ryan and him stays going. So
yeah, Cameron,
sure. I think he's a top 50 wide receiver now.
Mm-hmm.
I think because at my 50, I got Marvin Jones, and I think he can be better than Marvin Jones is this year. So I don't see why he can't sneak into that, and he's got a lot of room to move up in those rankings, because as you get down, in the Jarvis Landry, Corey Davis, Jalen Waddle, Cole Beasley is Marquise Browns. Those are all guys that you don't really know what you're going to get from or get out of them yet, and they're guys because some of them are in new situations. Some of them have just never been consistent in their career. Some of them are rookies. So he's a guy that definitely, like, you're looking in the last round 12, round 11, 13, 14, that he wouldn't hurt to take a flyer on. A lot of those guys you end up dropping anyways if they don't pan out. And so why not just take a flyer on a guy who, like Ty was saying, was on pace to put up crazy stats for a guy that we weren't even going to talk about. So
absolutely. I think Russell Gage is a guy you should look at in the later rounds. I don't think you need to draft him any earlier than your wide receiver 3. If you draft him as your wide receiver 3, I hope you stocked up on running back before then. So I think that's all we need to cover in terms of Julio. So thanks for tuning in, getting all the news from the fantasy football fellas. Want to stay up to date, make sure you have all the latest news possible and not have to wait until a podcast comes out until it's old. So fellas, any final thoughts before we sign off here? A no and a head shake.
I thought it looked like Cam wanted to say something.
Oh, no, I don't. I'm good.
He's bluffing.
Thank you, though.
Bluffing.
Well, awesome. Thanks for tuning in to an emergency episode of Fantasy Football, fellas. We will see you all later this week. Deuces.